The great clock in the entrance hall of Ashworth Manor struck its first note at precisely 11:59:30. By the time it completed its 12th chime, Lord Edmund Ashworth lay dead in his study, a crystal paperweight beside his shattered skull, and the new year of 1936 had begun with murder. Captain Arthur Hastings, my ever-faithful companion, had accompanied me to this grand estate in the rolling hills of Berkshire for what was promised to be an elegant celebration. The invitation had come from Lady Clarissa Ashworth herself, who had met Poirot at a charity function in London some months prior. She had been most insistent that we attend her New Year's Eve gathering, claiming that my friend's presence would add a certain cachet to the festivities. A weekend in the country. Poirot, I had said enthusiastically when the embossed invitation arrived. Fresh air, good company, and no talk of crime. Just what we need. Poirot had regarded me with those extraordinary green eyes of his, one eyebrow raised in that particular way that suggested I had said something remarkably naive. When have such predictions ever proven accurate, mon ami? He had replied, adjusting his perfectly waxed moustache. But yes, we shall accept. Lady Ashworth was most charming, and besides, the symmetry of beginning the new year in an orderly English country house appeals to the mathematical nature of Poirot. Now, as I stood in the doorway of Lord Ashworth's study at 3 minutes past midnight, watching the local constable's face turn an alarming shade of green, I reflected that Poirot's instincts had once again proven superior to my own optimism. The study was a masterpiece of masculine comfort, dark wood paneling, leather chairs worn to perfection, and shelves lined with first editions. Lord Ashworth lay face down on the Persian carpet between his mahogany desk and the fireplace, where a fire still crackled with indifferent cheerfulness. Blood had pooled beneath his head, staining the intricate patterns of the rug in a manner that would have distressed its owner considerably, had he been alive to notice. Poirot stood near the body, his hands clasped behind his back, his patent leather shoes positioned with geometrical precision. He had not touched anything, but his eyes, those eyes missed nothing. They catalogued every detail with the efficiency of a recording device. The clock struck 12, he murmured, almost to himself. And at what point during those 12 chimes was Lord Ashworth struck down? That, mes amis, is our first question. Lady Clarissa Ashworth sat in one of the leather chairs, her evening gown of silver silk now seeming garish against her pale face. She was a woman of perhaps 45, handsome rather than beautiful, with the bearing of one accustomed to command. Her hands trembled as she held a glass of brandy that someone had pressed upon her. "I cannot believe it," she whispered. Edmund was alive at dinner. We toasted the year together in the drawing room. He excused himself at 11:45, saying he had a matter of business to attend to in his study. Business. On New Year's Eve. Her voice cracked with a mixture of grief and indignation. The local constable, a well-meaning fellow, named Perkins, cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but did his lordship say what sort of business?" He did not. Edmund was not a man who explained himself to anyone, least of all to his wife. There was a note of bitterness in her tone that did not escape Poirot's notice. I saw his eyes flicker toward her, then away. "And the rest of the party?" Poirot asked gently. "They remained in the drawing room?" "Not all of them," Lady Ashworth replied, her composure returning slightly. "People were moving about. It's New Year's Eve, Monsieur Poirot. Guests wander. They refresh their drinks. They step out for air. The young people went to the conservatory to see the midnight fireworks we had planned. My son Philip was organizing them. But you yourself, madame, you remained in the drawing room?" She hesitated. I went up to my room briefly. The excitement, the noise. I needed a moment of quiet before midnight. I returned just as the clock began to strike. And it was you who discovered the body? No. Her hands tightened on the glass. It was Dr. Renfrew. He had gone to find Edmund, to wish him a happy new year. We heard him shout, and we all came running. As if summoned by the mention of his name, a man appeared in the doorway. Dr. Marcus Renfrew was a distinguished gentleman of perhaps 60, with iron-grey hair and the steady hands of his profession. At present, those hands were clasped tightly together, and his face bore the expression of a man who has seen death in many forms, but never quite grows accustomed to it. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice controlled but strained. "I'm glad you're here. This is most irregular, most disturbing. But you are a medical man, yes?" Poirot inquired. "You have examined the body?" "Only briefly. I confirmed death, of course. The skull is fractured. The blow was delivered with considerable force. Death would have been nearly instantaneous. Nearly, but not quite instantaneous?" Dr. Renfrew frowned. "He might have survived a few seconds, a minute at most. But he would not have been conscious, nor able to cry out. So the murderer struck, and Lord Ashworth fell where he stands now, silently." Poirot nodded slowly. "The clock begins its chimes, and during those chimes, or perhaps just before, or just after, a man's life ends. And all the while, in the next room, people toast the new year with champagne. C'est extraordinaire, n'est-ce pas?" I moved closer to examine the scene. The crystal paperweight, a heavy piece some 5 inches in diameter, lay on the carpet about 3 feet from the body. It was stained with blood, and I leaned closer, what appeared to be hair. "The weapon is there," I said, pointing. "Quite obvious, really." "Ah, my good Hastings," Poirot said, and I detected the faintest hint of amusement in his tone. "Yes, the weapon is obvious. But is it perhaps too obvious? Consider, if you will, a man strikes another man with such force as to fracture the skull. Would he then carefully place the weapon upon the carpet beside the victim? Or would he, in the passion or panic of the moment, retain it in his grasp, or cast it aside more forcefully?" I looked again at the paperweight. It lay there with almost deliberate placement, as if arranged for a photographer's study of a murder scene. "You think it was staged?" Lady Ashworth asked, her voice rising. "But why? And by whom? Those, madame, are precisely the questions that Poirot must answer." He turned to Constable Perkins. "The room must be secured. No one is to enter until a thorough examination has been completed, and I must request that all of the guests remain at the manor. No one is to leave. Now see here," a new voice interrupted from the corridor. "I'm due back in London tomorrow for an important meeting. You can't seriously expect." The speaker pushed past Dr. Renfrew into the study. He was a man of about 40, powerfully built, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. His evening clothes were impeccable, but he wore them with the air of a man more comfortable in tweeds. "Mr. Gerald Thornbury," Lady Ashworth said wearily. "Edmund's business partner. Gerald, please. This is not the time." "Not the time?" "Clarissa, I'm sorry about Edmund, truly I am, but I have obligations. The firm will survive without you for a few days," Poirot interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that silenced Thornbury immediately. "A man has been murdered, monsieur. That takes precedence over all business matters, however pressing. You will remain, and you will answer questions when required. C'est compris?" Thornbury's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. "Very well. But I want it known that I object to being treated as a suspect. I was with Lady Ashworth's nephew in the billiard room when the clock struck 12, Poirot inquired. "You are certain of this?" "Absolutely certain." We had just finished a game, and Julian, that's the nephew, Julian Hartley, suggested another. We heard the clock chiming and raised our glasses to the new year. How very convenient, murmured a woman's voice from the corridor, dripping with sarcasm. The speaker was a striking woman of perhaps 30, with dark hair cut in the fashionable bob of the period and eyes that held a sharp intelligence. She wore a gown of deep emerald that set off her pale complexion, and she held herself with the confidence of someone who knew her own worth. "And you are Mademoiselle?" Poirot asked. "Miss Vivienne Ashworth, Edmund's niece. Well, his late brother's daughter, to be precise." She stepped into the room, surveying the scene with remarkable composure. "Uncle Gerald protests his innocence very loudly. Don't you think, Monsieur Poirot? In my experience, the innocent rarely feel the need to proclaim themselves quite so vigorously. That's a damned lie, Vivienne, and you know it." Thornbury's face flushed with anger. "Is it? Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you and Uncle Edmund had such a blazing row yesterday afternoon? The servants heard you shouting at each other in this very room. That was business. It's always business with you, isn't it, Gerald? Even when you were stealing from the company." "Enough." Lady Ashworth rose to her feet, swaying slightly. Dr. Renfrew moved quickly to support her. "I will not have this. Not now. Not with Edmund lying there." Her voice broke, and tears began to stream down her face. "Please, please everyone, just go. Leave us alone." Poirot moved forward with surprising gentleness. "Madame, I understand your distress. But you must understand, the sooner we begin our investigation, the sooner justice may be served. Time, it is the enemy in such cases. Evidence disappears, memories become clouded, and the guilty, they have the opportunity to construct their defenses." Lady Clarissa looked at him through her tears. "Then investigate, Monsieur Poirot. Find out who did this terrible thing. But please," her voice dropped to a whisper, "please do it quickly. I cannot bear this uncertainty." "I shall do more than that, madame," Poirot replied. "I shall uncover the truth. And the truth, it may be uncomfortable for many people in this house, but it is the only thing that matters to Hercule Poirot." He turned to survey the assembled company, Lady Ashworth with her grief, Dr. Renfrew with his professional concern, Gerald Thornbury with his barely suppressed anger, and Vivienne Ashworth with her sardonic intelligence. Each face told a story, each pair of eyes held secrets. Now, Poirot said briskly, "We shall begin with the simple facts. Constable Perkins, you will please escort Lady Ashworth to the drawing room where she may rest. Dr. Renfrew, you will remain here with Hastings and myself. As for you, Monsieur Thornbury, and you, Mademoiselle Vivienne, you will join the others and wait. Poirot will speak with each of you in turn." "But what about?" Thornbury began. "All questions will be answered in due course," Poirot said firmly. "For now, you will do as I ask. The investigation, it has begun." As the room emptied, leaving only Poirot, myself, and Dr. Renfrew with the body of Lord Edmund Ashworth, I caught my friend's eye. There was a look there I had seen many times before, the look of a hunter who has scented prey, of a mind that has already begun to weave together the threads of a complex puzzle. "Hastings," he said quietly, "observe the positioning of the body. Observe the weapon. Observe the time at which this crime occurred. Everything, it means something. Nothing is by chance." "But surely," I said, "the important thing is to establish who had the opportunity. Who was alone, or nearly alone, at the stroke of midnight? Ah, mon ami, you think in straight lines as always. But murder, it is rarely a straight line. It curves, it loops back upon itself, it conceals itself behind the obvious." He knelt beside the body, his movements precise and economical. "No, Hastings. The important thing is not merely who could have committed this murder. The important thing is who would have committed this murder in precisely this way, at precisely this time. And to answer that, we must first understand the victim. He straightened up, brushing an invisible speck from his trousers. Tell me, Dr. Renfrew, you are a guest in this house, but surely you have some knowledge of Lord Ashworth. What manner of man was he? Dr. Renfrew hesitated, choosing his words with care. Edmund Ashworth was a complicated man, Monsieur Poirot. Successful in business, demanding of those around him, not always easy to like. But I would not have said he was a man who inspired murder. And yet, Poirot said softly, someone has murdered him. Therefore, whatever you would or would not have said, the reality tells us otherwise. Come, Doctor, in this investigation, there is no room for politeness or social niceties. I must know the truth. Dr. Renfrew sighed. Very well. Edmund was a tyrant. Oh, a charming tyrant when it suited him, but a tyrant nonetheless. He controlled his wife's every movement, his son's every decision. He drove his business partner to distraction with his suspicions and his constant interference. He quarreled with his niece about her inheritance from her father. He stopped abruptly. I should not speak ill of the dead. On the contrary, Poirot said, you should speak nothing but the truth of the dead, for it is the truth that will lead us to his killer. This man, he made enemies? He made enemies, Dr. Renfrew confirmed quietly. Then, said Poirot, his eyes gleaming with that particular intensity I knew so well, we have our work before us. For in this house, at this moment, there are perhaps a dozen people who might have wished Lord Edmund Ashworth dead. And one of them has acted upon that wish. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at the scene one final time. The clock struck 12. He murmured, the new year began, and with it, a new mystery for Hercule Poirot. Come, Hastings, let us meet the guests of Ashworth Manor, for among them walks a murderer. The drawing room of Ashworth Manor presented a tableau that might have been lifted from a society painting, were it not for the palpable tension that hung in the air like smoke. The room itself was magnificent, high ceilings adorned with elaborate plasterwork, walls covered in silk damask the color of champagne, and furniture upholstered in rich burgundy velvet. A magnificent Christmas tree still stood in one corner, its decorations glittering in the light from the crystal chandeliers, an incongruous symbol of festivity in a house now touched by death. Poirot paused in the doorway, and I observed him as he observed the assembled company. His eyes moved from face to face with the precision of a jeweler examining stones, cataloguing, assessing, filing away every detail for future reference. There were 9 people in the room, not counting Lady Clarissa, who sat in a wing chair near the fireplace, staring into the flames with unseeing eyes. Dr. Renfrew had taken up a position beside her, his medical instincts clearly alert to any sign of collapse. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmured conversations. I am Hercule Poirot. Some of you may know of me, some may not. It is of no importance. What is of importance is that a murder has been committed in this house, and until the perpetrator is identified, no one may leave. This is outrageous. The speaker was a young man who had risen from his seat with indignant energy. He was perhaps 25, handsome in a weak, aristocratic way, with fair hair and the Ashworth family features visible in the line of his jaw. You have no authority to hold us here. We are guests, not criminals. And you are, monsieur? Poirot inquired mildly. Philip Ashworth, Lord Ashworth's son, and I demand You demand nothing, Poirot interrupted, his voice still gentle but carrying an unmistakable steel beneath its silk. Your father has been murdered. Surely even you, young man, can see that this takes precedence over any social inconvenience. Philip Ashworth's face flushed crimson, but before he could reply, another voice intervened. Do sit down, Philip. You're making a spectacle of yourself. The speaker was a young woman seated on the sofa, her posture perfect, her expression one of cool disdain. She was beautiful in a classical way, blonde hair arranged in soft waves, blue eyes that held calculation rather than warmth, and a figure that her rose-colored gown displayed to advantage. Monsieur Poirot is quite right. None of us can leave until this dreadful business is resolved. And you are? I asked, taking out my notebook. Miss Cynthia Marlowe. I was. Engaged to Philip. She glanced at the young man with an expression that suggested the engagement might now be under review. We were to be married in the spring. If my father hadn't insisted on that ridiculous prenuptial agreement, Philip muttered, slumping back into his chair. As if Cynthia was some fortune hunter. A bark of laughter came from the other side of the room. The man who had made it was young, perhaps 30, with dark hair slicked back in the fashionable style and an expression of perpetual amusement that I found instantly irritating. Oh, come now, Philip. Your father was nobody's fool. He knew exactly what Cynthia was after. How dare you, Julian? Cynthia's composure cracked, revealing genuine fury beneath. Julian Hartley, Poirot said, identifying the speaker. Lady Ashworth's nephew, I believe? Guilty, as charged, Julian replied with a smirk. Though not, I hasten to add, guilty of murder. I was in the billiard room with dear Uncle Gerald when the bells tolled, so you have said. Poirot's gaze moved on, settling on an elderly woman who sat ramrod straight in a Louis chair, her evening gown of black silk perfectly proper, her grey hair arranged with military precision. She held a lorgnette through which she examined Poirot with undisguised interest. Mrs. Agatha Pemberton, she announced before Poirot could ask. I am Lady Ashworth's aunt. I have been a guest in this house for the past 3 weeks, and I can tell you categorically that Edmund Ashworth was a scoundrel who deserved everything he got. Aunt Agatha. Lady Clarissa gasped, emerging from her reverie. Oh, don't be so hypocritical, Clarissa. The man made your life a misery, and everyone in this room knows it. I'm merely saying what everyone else is thinking. She turned back to Poirot. I, however, did not kill him, much as I might have wished to. I was in my room when the clock struck 12. I have no fondness for drunken celebrations, and retired early. Can anyone verify this? Poirot asked. My maid, Perkins, not the constable, a different Perkins, brought me my cocoa at 11:45. Other than that, I was alone. A cough from near the window drew our attention. A thin, scholarly-looking man with wire-rimmed spectacles had been standing so quietly that I had barely noticed him. He wore his evening clothes with the air of one uncomfortable in formal dress, and his hands were ink-stained despite the occasion. Mr. Leonard Ashworth, he said quietly. Edmund's younger brother. I live in the cottage on the estate. I'm writing a book, you see, on medieval history. Edmund allowed me to use the library here. I came to the house for dinner, naturally, but I returned to my cottage just before midnight. The noise, the crowds, I find them difficult. Did anyone see you leave? I asked. I'm not certain. I simply slipped away. No one pays much attention to me generally. There was no self-pity in his tone, merely statement of fact. And the last 2 people? Poirot's eyes had found them. A couple seated together on a smaller sofa, somewhat removed from the others. The man was perhaps 50, distinguished in appearance with silver temples and an air of prosperity. The woman beside him was considerably younger, perhaps 35, attractive in a faded way, wearing too much jewelry for good taste. "Sir Michael Hartwell," the man said, his voice carrying the confidence of old money. "And this is my wife, Lady Daphne. We're neighbors. Our estate borders Ashworth Manor to the west. Edmund and I served together on several charitable boards. We were invited tonight as old friends." "And where were you both at midnight?" Poirot asked. Sir Michael and Lady Daphne exchanged a glance. "We were in the conservatory," Lady Daphne said, her voice slightly breathless, "with the young people, watching for the fireworks. There were quite a few of us there." "Quite a few," Poirot repeated thoughtfully. "I see." He moved to the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as if listening to music only he could hear. "So," he said at last, "we have here a collection of people. Some family, some friends, some business associates, all gathered to celebrate the new year. And when the clock strikes 12, Lord Ashworth lies dead in his study. It is, as they say, a locked room mystery, though the room was not locked. It is instead a crime of timing. The murderer had but a few moments to act. They had to know Lord Ashworth would be in his study. They had to have access to him. And they had to have a reason to kill him." He paused, his green eyes sweeping across the assembled faces. "And what I observe, mes amis, is that every single person in this room had a motive. Every single person had reason to wish Lord Edmund Ashworth dead." The silence that followed this pronouncement was absolute. The tension in the drawing room was palpable. Philip Ashworth had gone white. Cynthia Marlowe's carefully composed facade had cracked, and even the unflappable Julian Hartley had lost his smirk. Mrs. Agatha Pemberton, however, merely raised her lorgnette higher and regarded Poirot with something approaching approval. "Well," she said dryly, "at least you don't waste time with pleasantries, Monsieur Poirot. I appreciate directness in a man. Madame, in matters of murder there is no room for anything else." Poirot turned to Constable Perkins, who had entered the room and stood uncertainly near the door. "Constable, you have sent word to Scotland Yard?" "Yes, sir. Inspector Japp himself is coming down, but the weather's turned bad on the roads. He won't be here until morning at the earliest." "Ah, bon. Then we shall not waste these hours waiting." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that peculiar intensity I had come to recognize as the signal that his formidable intellect had fully engaged. "We shall begin our interviews immediately. Captain Hastings will take notes. I will require a room, somewhere private, where we will not be disturbed." "The library," Lady Clarissa said faintly. "You may use the library. It's across the hall. Excellent. Hastings, if you please." Poirot gestured toward the door, then paused and turned back. "One more thing. I must ask that no one discuss this case amongst yourselves. Each person's recollection, it must remain pure, uncontaminated by the observations of others. You understand?" There were murmurs of reluctant agreement. "Good. Then we shall begin with..." Poirot's finger pointed unerringly at Gerald Thornbury, who had been attempting to make himself inconspicuous near the drinks cabinet. "You, Monsieur Thornbury. You will come with me now." Thornbury's face darkened. "Why me first? What are you implying?" "I imply nothing. I establish facts. You were Lord Ashworth's business partner. You had access to him. You quarreled with him yesterday. These are reasons enough to speak with you first, n'est-ce pas? That quarrel was nothing. Business disagreements happen all the time. Then you will have no difficulty explaining it to me in detail." Poirot's tone brooked no argument. "Come." The library was everything one might expect in a country house of this caliber. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, comfortable reading chairs positioned to catch the light from tall windows, and a massive desk that spoke of serious scholarly work. A fire burned in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the room. Poirot settled himself in the chair behind the desk with the air of a judge taking his seat in court. I positioned myself to one side with my notebook ready. Thornbury remained standing until Poirot gestured impatiently to a chair opposite. "Now then, Monsieur Thornbury, you will tell me about this quarrel with Lord Ashworth." Thornbury shifted uncomfortably. "It was a matter of business." Yes, you have said this already. But what business specifically?" Edmund suspected, wrongly I might add, that I had been manipulating the company accounts. He accused me of embezzlement. The words came out in a rush, as if Thornbury were relieved to finally speak them aloud. "And had you been embezzling?" "Certainly not. I've given 20 years to that firm. 20 years of loyalty, of building it up alongside Edmund, and he repays me with accusations and threats." "What threats?" Poirot's question was sharp. He said he would have the accounts audited, that if he found any irregularities he would see me in prison. Thornbury's hands clenched. He said he would ruin me, destroy my reputation, all because of some discrepancies that any competent accountant could explain. "But you are not an accountant, are you?" "I'm the managing partner. I don't concern myself with every petty detail of the bookkeeping. Yet Lord Ashworth did concern himself with these details?" "Edmund concerned himself with everything. He trusted no one." Thornbury leaned forward. "Look, Monsieur Poirot, I won't pretend I liked the man. By the end I despised him. But I didn't kill him. I was with Julian Hartley when— Yes, in the billiard room. How very convenient." Poirot steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "Tell me, had you finished your game when the clock struck 12? "We had just finished, yes. Julian suggested another, but I said I wanted to get a drink first, to toast the new year properly." "And you did this? You obtained a drink?" Thornbury hesitated. "Well, no. We heard the commotion almost immediately, Dr. Renfrew shouting. We rushed to the study. So you were, in fact, in the corridor when Lord Ashworth was discovered?" "We were coming from the billiard room, yes, but—" "Which is located where?" "Precisely. At the end of the east wing. It's quite far from the study, but to reach the drawing room, one would pass near the study." "Would one not?" Thornbury's face had gone red. "You're twisting things." "Julian will confirm everything I've said." "Ah, yes, Julian Hartley, the charming young man with the perpetual smile. Tell me, Monsieur Thornbury, how long have you known him?" "Julian? He's been around for years. Clarissa's nephew, always hanging about looking for handouts from Edmund. And did he receive these handouts?" "Not from Edmund. The old man couldn't stand him. Called him a wastrel and a parasite. Yet Monsieur Hartley was invited to this New Year's celebration?" Clarissa insisted. "She has a soft spot for the boy, though God knows why." Poirot nodded slowly, filing this information away in that remarkable mind of his. "One last question. Monsieur Thornbury, these allegations of embezzlement, were they true?" The silence stretched between them. Finally, Thornbury spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "There were some irregularities. Nothing criminal, you understand. Just a matter of borrowing from one account to cover another temporarily. I always intended to pay it back." "How much?" £50,000. I could not suppress a gasp. That was an enormous sum. "And Lord Ashworth, he discovered this?" "He was about to. The audit would have revealed everything." Thornbury looked up, his eyes desperate. "But I didn't kill him. What good would that do me? His death doesn't make the audit go away. If anything, it makes things worse. Unless," Poirot said softly, "you had planned to make the evidence of your embezzlement disappear before the audit could be completed. Unless you needed time that Lord Ashworth's death would provide you." Thornbury rose abruptly from his chair. "I've had enough of these insinuations. I've answered your questions. I've told you the truth. If you want to arrest me, Then do so. Otherwise, I'm leaving. Sit down, Monsieur Thornbury. Poirot's voice was quiet, but contained such authority that Thornbury found himself obeying before he realized what he was doing. You may leave when Poirot says you may leave, and not before. After dismissing Thornbury with instructions not to speak to anyone about the interview, Poirot requested that Lady Clarissa be brought to the library. She entered with Dr. Renfrew supporting her elbow, though she waved him away once seated. "Thank you, Marcus, but I can manage." Her voice was stronger now, though her eyes remained red-rimmed. "Monsieur Poirot, I will tell you whatever you need to know. Madam, I appreciate your cooperation during this difficult time." Poirot's manner softened perceptibly. "First, I must ask, your marriage to Lord Ashworth, it was a happy one?" Lady Clarissa's laugh was bitter. "Happy? No. Monsieur Poirot, it was not happy. But it was respectable, and in our circle that counts for considerably more than happiness. You speak with remarkable candor. My husband is dead. What purpose would lies serve now?" She met Poirot's gaze directly. Edmund was controlling, demanding, and jealous. He monitored my every movement, questioned my every friendship. When we married 26 years ago, I thought I was fortunate to catch such an eligible bachelor. I learned my mistake quickly enough. Yet you remained with him. Where would I go? I had no money of my own. Edmund made certain of that. He controlled every penny, doled out my allowance as if I were a child. And there was Philip to consider. I couldn't abandon my son. Your son, who also had difficulties with his father? Lady Clarissa's hands tightened in her lap. Edmund disapproved of Philip's every choice. His friends, his interests, his engagement to Cynthia, nothing was ever good enough. He threatened to cut Philip off entirely if he married without that dreadful prenuptial agreement. And yet, Mademoiselle Marlowe agreed to it? Cynthia is pragmatic. She calculated that half of something was better than all of nothing. Lady Clarissa paused. I sound terribly cynical, don't I? But one learns cynicism in a marriage like mine. Madame, forgive me, but I must ask, did you kill your husband? The question hung in the air. Lady Clarissa looked at Poirot with an expression I could not quite read. No, Monsieur Poirot. Though I will confess there were times I wished him dead. But I did not kill him. You said you went to your room just before midnight. Can anyone verify this? My maid, Simmons, was there. She helped me with my necklace. The clasp was troubling me. She left at 5 minutes to 12, and I remained in my room until I heard the clock begin to chime. Then I returned to the drawing room. So for approximately 5 minutes you were alone? Yes. And your room, it is located where in relation to the study? Directly above it. Lady Clarissa's voice was steady. So yes, Monsieur Poirot, I had opportunity. I had motive. But I did not kill Edmund. Whatever you may think of me, I am not a murderer. Poirot studied her for a long moment. I think, madame, that you are a woman who has suffered greatly. But whether that suffering drove you to murder, that remains to be seen. Then see it, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Clarissa rose with dignity. Investigate thoroughly. Question everyone. But in the end, you will find I am telling the truth. After she left, I turned to Poirot. What do you make of her? I make nothing yet, mon ami. But one thing is certain. In this house, there are many who had reason to wish Lord Ashworth dead. Philip Ashworth entered the library with the defensive posture of a schoolboy summoned to the headmaster's office. His earlier indignation had faded, replaced by something that looked very much like fear. He threw himself into the chair with studied carelessness, but I noticed his hands trembling slightly. I suppose you think I did it. he said before Poirot could speak. "Everyone always blames the son, the heir who couldn't wait for his inheritance." "Do you feel blamed, Monsieur Ashworth?" Poirot asked mildly. "I feel." Philip stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what I feel. My father is dead. I should feel grief, shouldn't I? But all I feel is relief. Does that make me a monster? It makes you honest. Tell me your relationship with your father, it was difficult?" "Difficult?" Philip laughed harshly. "He made my life hell, Monsieur Poirot. Nothing I did was ever good enough. I wasn't clever enough, wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't man enough. He compared me constantly to what he had been at my age. Self-made, ruthless, successful. And I was just a disappointment. You wished to pursue a different path? I wanted to paint. Can you imagine? The son of Edmund Ashworth, wanting to be an artist. He called it a waste, a frivolity. He threatened to disinherit me if I didn't take my place in the firm. So I did, and I've been miserable ever since." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And now, with your father gone, you inherit everything?" "Yes, the house, the business, the fortune, all of it comes to me. Mother receives a portion, of course, but the bulk of the estate is mine." Philip met Poirot's eyes. "So yes, I had the best motive of anyone here. I inherit millions. But I didn't kill him. Where were you when the clock struck 12? "In the conservatory. I had organized the fireworks display, or rather, I had hired people to organize it. I was supervising, making sure everything was ready. There were at least a dozen people with me." "Can you name them?" Philip recited a list. Sir Michael and Lady Daphne Hartwell, several servants, some local guests I had not yet met. "We were all there together," he concluded. "We watched the clock through the glass, counted down to midnight, and then the fireworks began." "And you remained in the conservatory throughout?" "Until we heard Dr. Renfrew shouting. Then we all rushed to the study." Philip hesitated. "Monsieur Poirot, may I ask you something?" "But of course. Do you believe that a person can be relieved their father is dead and still be innocent of murder?" Poirot considered this carefully. "I believe, Monsieur Ashworth, that human emotions are complex. One can feel many things simultaneously: relief, guilt, grief, and yes, even a certain liberation. These feelings do not make you a murderer. Only actions make one a murderer. Then, you believe me? I believe nothing yet. I collect facts, I observe behaviors, and in time, the truth reveals itself. Tell me, this prenuptial agreement your father insisted upon for your marriage to Mademoiselle Marlowe. What were its terms?" Philip's face darkened. "If we divorced within 10 years, Cynthia would receive nothing. After 10 years, she would be entitled to a settlement, but a modest one. Father wanted to ensure she was marrying me, not my fortune. And Mademoiselle Marlowe's reaction to these terms? She was furious at first. We had terrible rows about it. But eventually she agreed. She said she loved me enough to accept his conditions." Philip's voice held a note of uncertainty, as if he questioned this himself. "But you had doubts?" "I." Philip stopped, looked away. "I don't know anymore. Sometimes I think Cynthia loves me. Other times, I wonder if she simply calculated that enduring 10 years of marriage to me was worth the eventual payoff. And now that your father is dead, this prenuptial agreement, does it still stand?" Philip's eyes widened. "I hadn't thought of that. I suppose it does. Father had it drawn up legally." After Philip departed, Poirot sat in contemplative silence for several moments, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in that characteristic pose. "Hastings," What do you make of young Monsieur Ashworth? He seems genuine enough, I replied. His relief at his father's death is certainly honest, if nothing else. But Poirot, he inherits millions. That's a powerful motive. Indeed. But is it powerful enough to commit murder in a house full of guests at the stroke of midnight, when one would almost certainly be caught? That is the question. He rose from his chair. Come, let us speak next with the beautiful Mademoiselle Marlowe. Cynthia Marlowe entered with the poise of a woman accustomed to making entrances. She arranged herself gracefully in the chair, smoothing her rose-colored gown, and regarded Poirot with cool appraisal. "I suppose you wish to ask me about my engagement to Philip," she said without preamble. "Among other things, yes." Poirot's eyes never left her face. "You agreed to Lord Ashworth's prenuptial terms. This must have been difficult." Difficult? Cynthia's laugh was brittle. It was insulting. Edmund Ashworth treated me like a gold digger, a fortune hunter. He had investigators look into my background, my family's finances, my previous relationships. It was humiliating. Yet you accepted his conditions. Because I love Philip. She said it firmly, but I detected something rehearsed in her tone, as if she had said these words many times before. Edmund was an old man. I calculated that we could wait him out. Eventually, he would die naturally, and Philip and I would be free to marry on our own terms. But you grew impatient with waiting? Cynthia's composure slipped fractionally. What are you implying? I imply nothing. I merely observe that Lord Ashworth's death comes at a most convenient time for you. The prenuptial agreement still stands, but Philip now controls his own fortune. He can be as generous to you as he wishes, n'est-ce pas? I didn't kill Edmund. Her voice had gone cold. I was in the conservatory with Philip and at least a dozen other people when he died. So everyone says. Tell me, mademoiselle, where were you during dinner? At the table, naturally. Why? And afterward before midnight? You remained in the drawing room continuously? Cynthia hesitated. I stepped out briefly. I needed some air, the room was stifling. Where did you go? Just to the terrace. I was only gone a few minutes. What time was this? I'm not certain. Perhaps 20 minutes before midnight? Poirot leaned forward. And did anyone see you on the terrace? I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to who might be watching me. How very convenient. Poirot's tone was dry. Tell me, during this brief sojourn on the terrace, did you perhaps pass by Lord Ashworth's study? The study is on the way to the terrace, yes, but I didn't stop there. I had no reason to. No reason, even though Lord Ashworth had summoned you to see him earlier that day? Cynthia went pale. How did you? Who told you that? The servants, mademoiselle. They hear everything, and they talk to Poirot. So, this meeting with Lord Ashworth. What was discussed? She was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Edmund offered me money. £50,000 to break off my engagement to Philip and leave quietly. And your response? I told him to go to hell. The vulgarity seemed shocking coming from her refined lips. I told him that I loved his son, and that no amount of money would change that. He laughed at me, called me a liar and a schemer, said he would find a way to drive me away from Philip, one way or another. He threatened you? He said he had information about my past, things that would ruin me socially if they became known. He promised to expose me unless I ended the engagement. And this information, was it true? Cynthia's eyes flashed with anger and something else. Fear, perhaps, or shame. That is none of your business, Monsieur Poirot. On the contrary, mademoiselle, Poirot said quietly. In a murder investigation, everything becomes my business. The secrets we wish to hide are often the very secrets that lead to murder. Cynthia rose abruptly from her chair. I've told you what you need to know. I was in the conservatory when Edmund died. I have witnesses. You cannot possibly suspect me. I suspect everyone, mademoiselle. It is my nature. Poirot waved his hand dismissively. You may go, but do not leave the manor, and do not discuss our conversation with anyone. After she left, I turned to Poirot with barely contained excitement. She had a secret. Something damaging enough that Lord Ashworth could use it as blackmail. Surely that's motive enough for murder? Perhaps. Or perhaps it is merely one more thread in a very tangled web. Poirot pulled out his watch and consulted it. It is now past 2 o'clock in the morning. The household is tired. Emotions run high. This is when people make mistakes, mon ami. This is when the truth begins to slip through the cracks of their carefully constructed lies. Who shall we interview next? The charming Julian Hartley, I think. He interests me greatly, that one. So quick with his wit, so comfortable in his own skin. Men like that often have much to hide. Julian entered the library with his characteristic insouciance, dropping into the chair and regarding us with that perpetual half-smile. Well, Monsieur Poirot, am I your prime suspect? I do hope so. It would add such excitement to an otherwise dreary existence. You find murder exciting, Monsieur Hartley? I find everything exciting when compared to the crushing tedium of my usual life. No prospects, no fortune, dependent on the charity of relatives who barely tolerate my presence. Yes, one might say I'm rather desperate for any form of entertainment. Even murder? Especially murder. Though I prefer to observe rather than participate, if you take my meaning. Poirot studied him carefully. You were in the billiard room with Monsieur Thornbury when the clock struck 12? So I was. We just finished a game. Gerald was in rather a state about something, probably the row he'd had with Uncle Edmund. He plays billiards terribly when he's agitated. I won 3 games in succession. And you suggested another game? I did. But Gerald wanted a drink. Then all hell broke loose with the discovery of the body. Rather spoiled the evening, I must say. You speak very cavalierly about your uncle's death. Julian's smile faded slightly. Edmund Ashworth was not my uncle. He was my aunt's husband. There's a significant difference. I had no affection for the man, and he had even less for me. He called me a parasite to my face on more than one occasion. Yet you accepted his hospitality? I accepted Aunt Clarissa's hospitality. Edmund merely tolerated my presence, because she insisted upon it. Julian leaned forward, his tone becoming more serious. Look, Monsieur Poirot, I won't pretend grief I don't feel. Edmund was a miserable old tyrant who made everyone around him wretched. But I didn't kill him. I had nothing to gain from his death. Did you not? I understand Lord Ashworth controlled your aunt's finances. With him gone, perhaps she becomes more generous to her beloved nephew? Ah, but there's the rub. Aunt Clarissa is kind, but she's not foolish. Whatever money she might give me would be a pittance compared to the Ashworth fortune. If I were to murder someone for financial gain, I'd have aimed considerably higher. At Philip Ashworth, perhaps? Julian's eyes widened slightly. Good God, you're serious. No, Monsieur Poirot. I may be a wastrel and a parasite, but I'm not a killer. Besides, Philip and I are friends. Poor sod, he's had a worse time of it than I have, if that's possible. You pity him? Enormously. At least I know I'm worthless. Philip still harbors delusions that he might please his father someday. Julian paused. Or rather, he did. I suppose that particular torture has ended for him now. After Julian departed, Poirot requested that Dr. Renfrew join us. The doctor entered looking considerably more composed than earlier, though fatigue lined his distinguished features. Monsieur Poirot, I hope I can be of assistance. This entire affair has been most distressing. Indeed, Doctor. You have known the Ashworth family for some time? Nearly 15 years. I'm the family physician, though I must confess I saw Lord Ashworth professionally very rarely. He was a remarkably healthy man for his age, or was, rather. Dr. Renfrew settled into the chair with a sigh. I attended Lady Clarissa more frequently. She suffers from nerves, you understand. The strain of her marriage took its toll. You were aware of difficulties in their marriage? It would have been impossible not to be. Edmund was not discreet about his treatment of his wife. The constant criticism, the financial control, it was psychological cruelty, though perfectly legal. The doctor's voice held barely suppressed anger. I urged Clarissa to leave him on several occasions, but she felt trapped. Trapped enough to kill him? Dr. Renfrew's head snapped up. Absolutely not. Clarissa is incapable of violence. I would stake my reputation on it. Your reputation or your heart, Doctor? Poirot asked gently. The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Renfrew's face had gone quite pale. I don't know what you mean. Come, Doctor. Poirot is not blind. You care for Lady Ashworth deeply? Perhaps more than a physician should care for his patient? Dr. Renfrew stood abruptly, walked to the window, his back to us. When he spoke, his voice was strained. I have loved Clarissa for 10 years. She knows it. I've never hidden my feelings from her. But she was, a married woman. Nothing improper has ever occurred between us. Yet with Lord Ashworth dead, she is now free. Are you suggesting I killed Edmund to clear the path to Clarissa? The doctor turned, his face a mixture of anger and anguish. My God, man, I'm a physician. I took an oath to do no harm. An oath that applies to your patients, Doctor. Was Lord Ashworth your patient? He consulted me occasionally, but no, he preferred a physician in London for anything serious. He didn't trust country doctors, he said. Then technically your oath would not prevent. My conscience would prevent it. Dr. Renfrew's voice rose. I may love Clarissa, but I would never, could never, commit murder. The very suggestion is monstrous. Poirot regarded him steadily. Then tell me, Doctor, where were you at midnight? I was in the drawing room with most of the other guests. When the clock began to strike, I happened to notice that Edmund had not returned from his study. I thought perhaps he'd fallen asleep. He sometimes dozed off after dinner. I went to wake him, to bring him back for the New Year's toast. His voice dropped. Instead, I found him dead. You entered the study alone? Yes. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, saw him lying there, and immediately checked for vital signs. There were none. He'd been dead for several minutes at least. You did not call out immediately? I was in shock, Monsieur Poirot. One does not expect to find one's host murdered. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing. Then I shouted for help. And you touched nothing else in the room? Only Edmund's body, to check his pulse. I'm a doctor. It was instinctive. Poirot nodded slowly. Tell me, Doctor, in your medical opinion, how long had Lord Ashworth been dead when you discovered him? Dr. Renfrew considered carefully. No more than 5 minutes. Possibly less. The body was still warm, and rigor mortis had not begun to set in. So he died very close to midnight? Almost certainly during those 12 chimes, yes? Merci, Doctor. You have been most helpful. Poirot paused. One final question. Do you believe Lady Ashworth capable of murder? The doctor met his gaze unflinchingly. No, Monsieur Poirot. I do not. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning when Poirot finally leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. I had filled several pages of my notebook with observations, contradictions, and alibis that seemed both ironclad and suspiciously convenient. Poirot, I ventured, surely we have enough information to form some theory? Everyone had motive, but only a few had genuine opportunity. Ah, Hastings, but that is where you are mistaken. Everyone claims to have an alibi, but alibis, they can be manufactured. They can be agreed upon. They can be lies built upon lies. He opened his eyes suddenly. No, there is something here that does not fit. Something that niggles at the brain of Poirot like a pebble in the shoe. What is it? The timing, mon ami. Always, it comes back to the timing. The clock strikes 12, this we know. During those 12 chimes, Lord Ashworth is murdered. But consider, the study is not far from the drawing room. The sounds of celebration would have masked any cry, yes, but they would not have masked the chimes themselves. The murderer had to know precisely when to strike. You think it was planned to coincide with midnight? Not merely planned, orchestrated. This was not a crime of passion, Hastings. This was calculated, precise, deliberate. The murderer chose that exact moment for a reason. He stood abruptly. Come. There is one more person we must speak with tonight. The niece, Vivienne Ashworth. She has been very quiet, that one. Too quiet, perhaps? Vivienne entered the library with the same composed confidence she had displayed earlier. Her emerald gown seemed almost defiant in its vibrancy, and her dark eyes missed nothing as they swept over our faces. Monsieur Poirot. Captain Hastings. I wondered when you would get to me. I'm rather insulted to be so far down your list. On the contrary, mademoiselle, I have saved you deliberately. You are, I think, the most observant person in this household. You notice things others do not. A double-edged compliment, if ever I heard one. She settled into the chair with feline grace. Yes, I observe. It's a survival skill when one is dependent on relatives who barely tolerate one's existence. Your uncle did not provide for you adequately? My uncle provided the bare minimum required by my father's will. A small allowance, grudgingly given. He resented me from the moment my father died, you see. My father, Edmund's older brother, was the one everyone loved. The charming one. The generous one. When he died in a riding accident 8 years ago, Uncle Edmund inherited the family business. He also inherited the responsibility of caring for me. And he discharged this responsibility poorly? He discharged it with contempt. He made it clear at every opportunity that I was a burden, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps he threw my way. When I suggested I might work, perhaps as a secretary or teacher, he forbade it, said it would reflect poorly on the family name. I was to remain decorative and dependent, a constant reminder of his obligation. Yet you accuse Monsieur Thornbury very quickly of being a thief. Why? Vivienne's smile was sharp. Because he is one. I've seen the books, Monsieur Poirot. Uncle Edmund was careless about where he left documents. I noticed discrepancies months ago. Gerald has been embezzling for at least 2 years. And you told no one? I told Uncle Edmund 3 weeks ago. He didn't believe me at first, said I was trying to cause trouble. But then he looked into it himself and discovered I was right. He confronted Gerald 2 days ago. I heard them shouting. You seem very well informed about household matters, mademoiselle. As I said, I observe. And unlike most people here, I had no particular reason to love Uncle Edmund, but neither did I wish him dead. His death actually complicates my life considerably. How so? Philip inherits everything. Philip, who is weak and easily influenced by that dreadful Cynthia. Do you think they'll continue my allowance out of the goodness of their hearts? I doubt it. Uncle Edmund, for all his faults, was bound by my father's will. Philip is not. So you had no motive to kill Lord Ashworth. On the contrary, I had every motive to keep him alive. Self-interest, Monsieur Poirot, is a powerful force. She leaned forward. But I can tell you something interesting. At 11:45, I went upstairs to fetch my cigarette case from my room. As I passed Uncle Edmund's study, I heard voices inside. 2 voices, arguing. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You could identify these voices? One was Uncle Edmund, certainly. The other... She paused. The other was muffled, as if the person was trying to keep their voice low. But I'm certain of one thing. It was a woman. A woman? I exclaimed. Can you be more specific? I'm sorry, Captain Hastings, but no. The door was thick, and I was trying not to be caught eavesdropping. I heard only a few words. Something about too late and you'll regret this. Then I heard footsteps approaching from the other direction, so I hurried to my room. And you saw no one leaving the study? No one. But when I came back down 5 minutes later, the study door was closed. Poirot rose from his chair, his mind clearly racing. Mademoiselle, you have been most helpful. Most helpful indeed. After she left, he turned to me with barely contained excitement. You see, Hastings? The web, it tightens. A woman argued with Lord Ashworth minutes before his death. Which woman? And about what? Dawn was breaking over Ashworth Manor when Poirot finally summoned everyone to the drawing room. The household had barely slept, and the faces that assembled before us bore the marks of exhaustion and anxiety. Lady Clarissa sat pale and composed, Dr. Renfrew hovering protectively nearby. Philip and Cynthia occupied opposite ends of a sofa, a telling distance between them. Gerald Thornbury stood by the window, his expression grim. Julian Hartley lounged with studied carelessness, though his eyes were alert. Vivienne Ashworth observed everything with her characteristic sharp intelligence. Mrs. Pemberton, the elderly aunt, sat upright and disapproving. The Hartwells huddled together nervously, and Leonard Ashworth, the scholarly brother, had been summoned from his cottage. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his appearance immaculate despite the sleepless night. Inspector Japp had arrived minutes earlier, his train having finally made it through the weather, and he stood to one side, watching with professional interest. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, we are gathered here because last night, at the stroke of midnight, Lord Edmund Ashworth was murdered. Many of you had reason to wish him dead. Some of you have lied about your whereabouts. All of you have secrets you wished to keep hidden. But Hercule Poirot, he does not concern himself with secrets unless they pertain to murder. And now, I will tell you what happened. The room was absolutely silent. Lord Ashworth was not a pleasant man. He controlled. He manipulated. He threatened. His wife he kept in virtual imprisonment. His son he crushed beneath impossible expectations. His business partner he accused of theft, accurately, I might add. His niece he treated with contempt. Even his brother, the gentle Leonard, he mocked for his scholarly pursuits. Lord Ashworth had created a household of people who despised him. But which one murdered him? Get on with it, Poirot, Mrs. Pemberton said tartly. We're not children to be lectured. Ah, but madame, the lecture is necessary. Because this murder, it was not simple. It was a performance, carefully choreographed. Consider the timing. Midnight precisely, when the clock chimes and all attention is elsewhere. Consider the weapon, a crystal paperweight from Lord Ashworth's own desk, left conspicuously beside the body. Consider the alibis everyone claims to have been elsewhere, surrounded by witnesses. Too perfect, n'est-ce pas? So we're all guilty? Julian asked with a nervous laugh. Non, monsieur. Only one person is guilty of murder. But several of you are guilty of deception. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Monsieur Thornbury, you were embezzling from the company. £50,000. You feared exposure and ruin. Mademoiselle Marlowe, Lord Ashworth had discovered something about your past, something damaging, and he threatened to reveal it unless you left Philip. Dr. Renfrew. You loved Lady Ashworth, and knew she would never be free while her husband lived. Each person mentioned shifted uncomfortably, but none of you killed Lord Ashworth. No, the murderer was far more clever than that. The murderer understood that with so many suspects, the truth would be obscured. The murderer chose midnight not merely for the noise and distraction, but for a far more cunning reason. He turned suddenly to face Lady Clarissa. "Madam, you told me you were in your room when the clock struck 12. Your maid confirmed she brought you cocoa at 11:45 and left you alone. But you did not remain in your room, did you?" Lady Clarissa's face went white. I don't know what you mean. I think you do." Mademoiselle Vivienne heard a woman's voice arguing with Lord Ashworth at 11:45. That woman was you. You went to confront your husband one final time, to tell him you wanted a divorce, that you could no longer bear your marriage. And he laughed at you, as he always did. He told you that you would never be free, that he would never grant you a divorce, that you were his property until death. "No," Lady Clarissa whispered. "No, that's not." "But you did not kill him, madame. You argued, yes. You raged at him, perhaps. But when you left that study, he was alive. You returned to your room, believing you had accomplished nothing. And then, at midnight, someone else entered the study. Someone who had been waiting for precisely this opportunity." Poirot turned, and his finger pointed unerringly at Philip Ashworth. "You, monsieur, you killed your father." Philip leaped to his feet. "That's absurd. I was in the conservatory with a dozen witnesses. Were you? Or were those witnesses perhaps not paying as close attention as they thought? The conservatory, it connects to the house through several passages. In the darkness, in the excitement of the fireworks, a person could slip away and return within minutes. And you had the strongest motive of all, not merely money, but freedom. Freedom to live your life, to paint, to marry without restriction. You can't prove any of this. But I can. You see, the murderer made one critical mistake. The crystal paperweight. It bore fingerprints, naturally. But not just the victim's fingerprints and not just the murderer's. It bore 3 sets of fingerprints. Lord Ashworth's, yes, but also yours, Monsieur Philip, and one other set. Sets that should not have been there if the paperweight had simply been used as a weapon and dropped. Philip's face had gone ashen. I touched it earlier in the day. That proves nothing. Perhaps not. But this does. Poirot produced a small piece of fabric. This fragment was caught on the door handle of the study. It is torn from an evening jacket. Your evening jacket, monsieur, which I observed has a small tear at the cuff. You rushed from the study after striking your father, and in your haste, you caught your sleeve. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Philip stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. You see, Poirot continued relentlessly, you planned this carefully. You knew your mother would argue with your father. You knew that would establish her presence in the study, create suspicion against her. You waited until midnight, when everyone's attention was on the fireworks, and you slipped away. Your father sat at his desk, his back to the door. You picked up the paperweight, and you struck him down. Then you arranged the scene to look like a crime of passion. The weapon dropped carelessly beside the body, and you returned to the conservatory before anyone noticed your absence. He deserved it, Philip said suddenly, his voice breaking. He deserved everything he got. He destroyed my mother's life. He destroyed mine. He was a monster. Perhaps he was, Poirot said quietly. But that did not give you the right to take his life. That is for the law to decide, not for you. Inspector Japp stepped forward. Philip Ashworth, I am arresting you for the murder of your father, Lord Edmund Ashworth.